Ever since its release over 11 years ago in August of 2014, Five Nights at Freddy's has been a franchise I've had a somewhat questionably healthy relationship with. During what I, and probably most people would agree with as the peak of FNaF, I was absolutely hooked on everything that the silly bear game had to offer. I didn't actually play that many of the games beyond the first three until a while later though, picking up the franchise again massively in 2018. In that same year, the FNaF series would seemingly reach an end, as at least for the time being, with the release of Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator and then the then final release, Ultimate Custom Night. Ultimate Custom Night, or UCN for short, was set up as the pinnacle of mechanical skill in the series. With a 50 character long roster, all with new mechanics, some familiar, some not, all flexible and able to be set to new difficulties at will, UCN was seemingly envisioned as the final send-off for the franchise. Of course, like many games, the FNaF franchise has included several hardest challenges throughout each game, often nicknamed max modes. However, each max mode in prior releases, whether that be the classic 420, FNaF 2's dreaded 1020, FNaF 3's aggressive nightmare, 4's 420 with challenges, Sister Location's Golden Freddy mode, or even 6's hardest Saturday, all pale in comparison to the max mode to rule them all, 50-20. With a single press of the button, the player can turn all 50 characters in the roster up to their maximum difficulty and jump into a 4.5 minute night of absolute chaos with several key elements to keep track of. The mode was initially thought to be impossible until streamer Remery, I've probably butchered that name, beat the mode live, followed quickly by the YouTuber Dorko, who had this to say upon completion. Earlier this year, I started revisiting FNaF during my annual FNaF phase with the release of Secret of the Mimic. I began to revisit the games, playing FNaF 1 again, as well as Sister Location for a bit, before taking a look at my Steam library, where I noticed UCN sitting dormant. It had been years since I'd actually played it, and I never really bothered to go much further than beating the Bears Attack challenges among a handful of others. However, this was when I got what would quickly become an agonizing idea. What if I tried to beat this game's max mode, or at least get close to it? And so I went on YouTube, found a really good guide. Bonus 5 YouTube channel, you should go check him out. Very good. Only reason this challenge was possible for me. And booted up Ultimate Custom Night after some 7 years of its release. With that in mind, the road to 50-20 had began. I followed the guide video in its explanation of all the AI components of the game, the universal mechanics of UCN, as well as how it laid out how to tackle the king of max modes. The first challenge was to get my head around the basics, ultimately meaning that 40-20 would be the first roster. Surprisingly, it turns out this wasn't exactly the most difficult feat, considering that 40-20 roster isn't actually overtly difficult to master. The entirety of the roster can be beat with a mechanic known as the office stall, in which you simply set an audio lure at night start, select camera 2, turn on the power generator, and then don't bother doing anything for the rest of the night beyond reacting to threats as they come. I won't go into super detail over it here, there are far better guides you can go watch for that. In effect, the majority of the 40-20 roster you would think you'd be worried about can't actually hurt us unless the cameras are open and on. Only when that condition is met does the game run its checks to see if an animatronic waiting to kill us can. The only time you want to use the cameras is to reset the ventilation, which is the game's check to ensure you don't just office stall indefinitely. And so, after only 7 attempts, I'd already cracked the first hurdle of the game, 40-20 was done. It presented a very flat learning curve, and I was already somewhat acquainted with the controls, making for an easy entry-level challenge to beat. It also got me the objectively best office in the game, so that's pretty fun. And so, that same night of starting my runs, I kept going. Oh, also, I would show you an edit of the night's gameplay, however, I won't lie. It's not really much to look at. You just kind of sit there and wait for the night to end while resetting vents every once in a while and putting on the mask. Within the same night, I moved on to the next challenge, 45-20. 45-20 adds in one of the next major components that's required in the lead-up and completion of 50-20, the global music box cycle. The GMB cycle is something that can be very tricky to initially attempt, but quickly becomes muscle memory with practice. In fact, it's so easy to pick up that the majority of my deaths were from me accidentally hitting the button for the power AC and not the button for the GMB. The cycle is what keeps the puppet, Lefty, Chica, and Music Man all away at the same time without ever actually having to modify our base gameplay. Something I forgot to mention is that the office stalling mechanic I used also combines cam stalling. By selecting camera 2, another decent chunk of the roster can actually never enter the office, making them effectively null for the night. However, if we ever had to look away to wind the music box, listen to Chica, or check on Lefty, we'd get ourselves absolutely obliterated by one of the plushy animatronics or Rockstar Chica. Nevertheless, by using the new GMB cycle, I cracked 4520 with only 20 attempts or so, readying myself to move on to 4920. At this point, I figured that I was probably going surprisingly faster each step, not taking as long as I'd actually anticipated to beat 95% of the roster. However, I did not realize just how much worse 4920 was going to make things. Alright, let me get this out of my system now. Foxy is a massive bitch. Unfortunately, within every FNaF game to some extent, RNG will always have a hand in things. And Foxy is one of the few UCN characters with a lot of reliance on RNG surrounding his mechanics. Foxy's progression speed is random, making him incredibly difficult to predict. Normally, we would look at him in Pirate's Cove to reset the progress of his individual stages and prevent him getting into the office. However, with all the new threats waiting to kill us and the cameras that this challenge adds, plus the need for cam stalling on camera 2, it's simply not possible. However, we can avoid him making much more progress by forcing Bonnie to take his place through a 0-frame flip, where we open and close the cameras without ever technically turning them on. This would let us trigger the Bonnie Foxy switch without ever actually looking at the cameras, helping us avoid that as long as possible. It's also worth noting that our setup for our runs have not changed since the first 4020 run, with a single audio lure, vent snare, camera stall, and power gen, with the GMB cycle atop. 4920 rapidly becomes a significant step up, and I'd honestly go as far as to say it's twice as hard as attempting 4520 mode. The main problem is getting good Foxy RNG and being so fast with event resets that no character actually has the chance to run their kill trigger when the cameras are on. Ultimately, cracking 4920 ended up being a several-day affair with countless runs and attempts. While I wasn't recording at this time, I died on a live stream with friends at 4 minutes 29.8 seconds, a whopping 0.2 seconds from the end of the night due to Foxy and the ventilation fully running out, which forced the camera panel open. Suffice to say, I was pretty pissed. However, before long on that night, I finally cracked the game on the same stream, for a day later doing it again privately just to verify that I was somewhat consistent at it. Took a few tries, but before long I completed 4920 with relative consistency, doing a third and fourth attempt not too long after either. At this point, I was pretty satisfied with my attempts, and despite some friends saying I should move on to 5020 itself, I cited that I was definitely good to some extent, but I was not nearly good enough at one of the tactics required for 5020, that being coin farming. Coin farming, in a nutshell, is essentially abusing the game's mechanics to force the balloon kids and Helpy to spawn, each of whom grants you one Faz coin after they're removed from the office. You see, to attempt 5020, the most common strategy that you use is to purchase the death coin to eliminate Funtime Foxy from the night, still keeping his point score in the total at night's end. You see, Funtime Foxy becomes a major problem for us because his showtime mechanic will require us to look away from camera 2 to camera 7. These showtime intervals can be as often as every single hour on the dot, which is highly problematic for the office stalling strategy. Furthermore, we can't office stall Funtime Foxy himself because failure to watch the showtime will either result in instantaneous death or death the next time we open the cameras. Coin farming itself takes a fair amount of skill and rapid reaction time to complete, and more often than not will have you getting killed by either Nightmare Balloon Boy or the Nightmare On. With that in mind, I put the game down for a few days before picking it up again and deciding just to try and see if I could attempt a 50-20 coin farm strategy out of curiosity. I started up a roster of just the Balloon Kids, Golden Freddy, Helpy, and the Nightmare On, and quickly started a few attempts. Quite a while, I was repeatedly dying to the Nightmare BB because I just wasn't checking a seat fast enough. However, with some practice over the course of an hour, I found myself getting enough coins for the Death Coin and the ability to purchase it pretty quickly, aiming for less than 25 seconds or so. And with that, finally, I decided to start my attempts at 50-20 mode. Right, we are so back for more custom night. I gotta make sure the audio is not horribly unbalanced. Off rip, I was having some problems with my attempts. Sure, by textbook I knew the strategy and how to play the game, but actually applying that knowledge was another beast entirely. When you're being bombarded with constant information overflow and the sudden appearance of Shadow Bonnie covering Nightmare Balloon Boy, I found myself failing to even get as far as the death coin. Runs would typically end within less than 20 seconds of starting, and even if I did buy the death coin, I kept forgetting to move the Web4 sign, or I'd be too slow and die to Nightmare on. Practice was pretty infuriating, especially when I was seeing no virtual improvement even after hours and hours of attempts. Quickly, one day runs had turned to 2 to 3. Before long, I've been at it for over a week. Having school holidays at this time gave me huge flexibility in constantly restarting and trying again, but I was hardly getting anywhere. Eventually, I broke the 12 AM wall with a single run reaching as far as a minute 51, pushing the PB out to 2 AM. However, despite this sudden progress, I was struggling to consistently get attempts past 12 AM, and it was all thanks to this fat ass. You see, Mr. Worst Game Mechanic over here, aka Toy Freddy, is a complete pain that can make 50-20 absolute hell. To simplify how he works, by the 15-second mark, Toy Freddy will be in his kill state based on how his minigame is coded. From here, Toy Freddy runs a 1 in 10 chance to kill us on every 0.5 second interval if the cameras are on. As you can imagine, near unavoidable RNG bullshit like this gets very frustrating very fast. Very slowly, my deaths were becoming solely because of him and the duck characters who function similarly, and only when trying to either buy the death coin or watch plush trap on the cameras, both requiring extended times of camera usage. I had finally reached what was, more or less, my cap of mechanical skill with the game. If I broke the 12 AM openings by watching plush trap and death coining Funtime Foxy, then my runs were often far more consistent and lasting longer and longer. Before long, a few lucky runs had reached as far as 3 minutes 15 and 3 minutes 58. However, my progress eventually stalled when school started up again and assessments were due in. And after taking a week long off, I was back at it, but struggling to make any progress in my runs. I did get one run that cracked as far as 4 minutes 5 seconds, but after that it was radio silent progress until another week later when I finally reached a PB of 4 minutes 22.1, only 7.9 seconds from the end of the night. Ultimately, I lost to a 22% chance of Scrap Trap spawning on its final interval during the night, in which having to shut his vent door ultimately drained the final bit of power I had left, allowing him into the office to end my run. Now with this loss, while a setback, proved to me that I could do it. Could get all the way to the end of the night with a good solid run if I cracked past the 12 AM wall. However, for weeks, no matter how much I tried, I just couldn't match my progress. Even after modifying my strategy to cater for RNG factors among other conditions, I just couldn't reach my personal best and was consistently dying around the 2 AM to 3 AM margin if I cracked 12 AM. A whole month went by and no progress was happening, and by now I'd been playing UCN near every day for some amount of time for nearly 3 months, albeit with a week and a half hiatus for assessments and exams. Still, no progress after weeks and weeks of attempts, day and night, was beyond demotivating, and all my anger with this game was slowly building. You can see in some of my latest runs there's just absolutely no thoughts behind my eyes, just nothing but silly bear game and code while I crunch time intervals, cycles, phases, and loops and shitty RNG on repeat for hours at a time, sometimes as much as 3-hour sessions with only 1 or 2 runs reaching 3 AM. At this point, I was pretty done with the game, and I'd played a few other Freddy's installments, including beating FNaF 4 all the way to night 5 just to take a load off of playing 50-20 mode. However, within the last week of editing and hopefully posting, I had set myself a new goal to beat 50-20 before my 18th birthday. At this time of setting the goal, it was just August 10th, and my birthday was on the 14th, leaving me just 3 days to try and crack the game and finally beat this stupid thing. However, by the end of the 10th, I was no closer than before. My frustration was building, but my stubborn ass was too dead set on toppling this dumb game from my soon-to-end childhood, so I could finally call it finished and dead and never have to touch it again. My anger carried over into the 11th, where I continued to struggle getting anywhere past 3 AM, dying several times. Look at me. This is the face of a guy who had long stopped having fun with this game and is just ready for it to end. Here I am, near midnight, with an early start the next day that I cannot miss, and I'm letting my choices be dictated by this stupid challenge game that at any time I could just put down and walk away from, but I'm too bloody stubborn and adamant on beating it that I just kept going over and over and over and over and over, even as it ticked on to well past midnight. Eventually, the 12th rolled around, and I got home tired but in an alright mood. The last few days I've been using a different laptop, hence the change of camera positioning and the mouse, and I actually found myself having a bit more consistency with the new setup, even if breaking the 3 a.m. wall was repeatedly being problematic. However, I was finding that today I was seeing a bit more success with strategies that had a bit more flexibility, as well as the use of the heater to keep the ducked characters off my back. Despite my good mood, my frustration was rapidly beginning to build again as bad RNG and a sore wrist were starting to lead to consistent deaths. Knowing I only had 2 days to beat the game, I was starting to feel the pressure of my own self-imposed deadline building, and if worst came to worst, I was going to have a single public holiday to attempt and crack the run in order to finish the game. I've been playing for some 14 minutes of repeated attempts and dying at 3 a.m, each run ending in death after death, until I finally had my first proper breakthrough of the day where... Let's go again. So close yet so come on. I'd done it. In just 14 minutes of hitting the record button, I cracked 50-20. As you can tell, I was pretty happy. No Toy Freddy RNG to screw me over, no sudden Ned Bear or Orville, just a straight, good, consistent, and lucky run that had me beat the game in what was my only attempt 15 or so of the day. However, keen-eyed viewers probably noticed that the footage playing doesn't line up with the sound, and that's because I messed up the recording settings on my winning run. I had recorded my winning run's face cam but not the actual gameplay when I realized that I had just trumped the king of official FNaF max modes and not actually filmed the winning run itself. And it was super tight too, with my power running out only just 2 seconds or so before night's end as Toy Chica entered the office, me being saved by the bell only moments away from what would have been an inevitable end to my best attempt of all time. You can actually see me going because I realized that I was at the end goal nearly and I just needed a few extra seconds to stall out, which I got pretty lucky on. And so, I was faced with a choice. Sure, I had a recording on my phone of me beating the game as insurance for proof, and sure, I did have the score to show, and my genuine reaction on camera, but all things considered, that'd be pretty anticlimactic. Well, I figured it would be better to have something to show on the screen, and so I decided to commit myself to one more recording of me beating the game. I settled back down with a shaky, adrenaline-fueled wrist for one more try, expecting what I was sure to be another hour-long grind fest of trying to beat until I run a winning attempt. It took 5 minutes. And this run was even better than the last, despite a close call with Music Man at the final margin. This is the run you saw before when I beat the game. Finally, I had proven to myself I could do it. In just 5 separate attempts, I'd beaten the game twice over. And at this point, the barrier was much more of a mental thing than anything, as knowing I'd done it before gave me far more patience for another attempt shortly thereafter. And so that was it. 2050 done. FNaF's King of Max modes completed, and my wrist finally able to rest after months of fast flicking gameplay and split second reactions. Finally able to put this dumb, stupid game down. I'm hoping to post this video on my 18th itself, but knowing me, I won't finish it in a day. I've literally written the script on the night of winning, so I've gotten little over a day to finish editing, and God knows I'm going to sleep through half of tomorrow. Nevertheless, we'll see. With that in mind, thanks for watching. I don't expect to make another video like this necessarily in this editing style. I like using a more sporadic and chaotic one. But for this, I was kind of in a rush and to make it work, so I had to cut some corners off the usual creative process that I like to follow. I do have some stuff in the works. In the meantime, I've got a couple things I want to work on in a video that's been sitting unfinished for quite a while. Still gauging how long I want it to be, debating between the easy way out of 10 minutes and then making a quick part 2, or all in one at 20 minutes. I've written majority of the script. I just have to make a solid ending for it. But I've still got a bit of flexibility on where that'll go, so I don't know. This is normally the part where I would plug the like and subscribe buttons, but I'm hardly big enough to warrant anything like that, so I'm not going to bother. Sub at your own discretion. I don't intend to make much else that has my face in it. There's a reason I use a rabbit as the channel icon. I think they're dumb, so expect more of that as the quote-unquote channel mascot, if anything else I make. With that, thanks for watching, and I'll be seeing you never. I'm a guy on your screen. The hell did you expect?